Welcome to episode 18 of the Progression Health Podcast. I'm here with Leah Lutz of Barbell Medicine. Leah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Leah, a coach, a lifter, as we were just talking before the podcast, a person that loves to do a lot of different things. But my career is coaching in both general population clients and competitive lifters. And so I get to work with a lot of people in a lot of different stages of life in their training, fitness, nutrition, all of that. And so that's me.
Yeah, you definitely do a lot of different things with your coaching. As I saw on your post, you covered like pretty much everything you'd want in a coach, which is great to see. But kind of bringing it back, how did you get started in the health and fitness industry, and kind of what's your backstory?
Perfect. I'm going to attempt to keep this one pretty short. It's something that I have talked about a lot, but it's really important, and I could talk a lot about it. So try to give the short version of this. But I did not grow up as an athletic person. I was definitely much more of that study, read, play piano, teach piano, cook, that kind of younger person. Was exposed to different things, but never really enjoyed anything particularly athletic. Later on, as a young adult, I did go to cooking school in my early 20s. I had been overweight. It was about that time that I became more overweight. And so over the course of several years, my weight reached an all-time high and during that time, I was yo-yo dieting for sure. I've tried every diet probably that anyone could imagine, but reached a high weight of 265 pounds, very uncomfortable with where I was, quite unhappy with how things had gotten. There's a lot involved in that, but it was a kind of a year beginning decision. I decided no matter what, almost, I needed to do whatever it took to change this. And so something switched, and I said, I'm going to have to, this is probably going to take a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort. I don't know, but I'm just going to stop like fiddling around and trying this and that, and I'm just going to go all in. So at that point, I joined a CrossFit gym, which at that stage of my life seemed like kind of like the most extreme, dedicated thing I could do, and found a small group of people that were insanely invested in my success. And it was very, very hard. I was terrified of doing this. It was exhausting. But at the same time, I changed a lot of how I ate, began lifting, began doing cardio, had accountability there. And like I said, I had people who supported me. So stayed on that for several years, really just fell in love with just everything. Lost a notable amount of weight, ended up tearing my rotator cuff, needing surgery. Yes. And it was kind of that point in particular was another big turning point in my fitness pursuit and life. I had been doing these life changes for a couple of years, and that surgery seemed so overwhelming, and I was terrified. Like, the weight is going to come back on. I don't know what to do. Everything was painful. I was like, I can walk. At that point, it felt like that was all I knew how to do, and I was just terrified. Kept trying different things. Eventually, that's where I got in touch with the coach that I now work with, and found Jordan Feigenbaum online. He was just getting started in his online nutrition coaching. And I was still, I think I was about 225 pounds at that point. And so I sent him an email and I said, hi, I'm Leah. I found you online. I had kind of knew him through several different people, but didn't know him personally. And I said, I need some help. Would you like to coach me? This is where I'm at. And that started the coaching relationship. And over the course of working with him, I lost a total of, I think it was over 100 pounds, 130 pounds or something, and started powerlifting. And through all of that, I learned a lot, and I grew a lot, and I started then coaching people kind of like on the side at my own gym. And I was working as a teacher at that point. So love working with people. Over the next year or so, Jordan and a couple other people were like, you should maybe consider coaching, like try this out. So I started coaching some small group classes, some one-on-one. And within another year or two, we started having the conversation of what if I changed careers and quit teaching, which I, by that time, had done for about 18 years and became a full-time coach. And it was a huge change, one that I struggled with for a while because I never imagined at that point that I was going to not teach. I love teaching in a lot of ways, but teaching is also very complicated. Side note, I'm quite relieved that I'm not teaching through what everyone is having to go through these last couple of years. But it was also a really natural shift in a lot of ways. And so I eventually did quit, became a full-time coach. And this is where I am now. I work for Barbell Medicine and have had some great mentorship, obviously, through these years, a lot of different study and growth, and taking a lot of what I've learned and gone through, and then being challenged with the people that I work with to learn more in these last years has definitely made me into the coach that I am today. And then I've had some fantastic clients over all these years. I've worked as a coach now for about 7 years. And so this is where I am now, full-time coach, going back to school as well. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit, but yes, that's the short version of my journey into the health and fitness world.
So you haven't really done much at all. You just kind of
yeah, I just say, yeah.
Just pretty much, yeah, everything you could do related to health and fitness, it seems like you've done. That's amazing. So
right.
Going back to the cooking school, I feel as though that's like a lost art or something nowadays. So what from the kind of the cooking skills you learned initially do you still use today? Do you still apply?
Good question. So, interestingly, when I went into cooking school, I was interested in going into baking and pastry. That was my love. Would also explain where I was with my weight. But during school, I became much more interested and learned a lot more just about cooking and, the hotline. And so ended up not pursuing baking and pastry as much, learned a lot more of the actual food cooking skills. And so I worked for a very short time in food, mainly in private catering and events and things like that. And discovered that is something that I absolutely love, but the food world as a career was not something that I was willing to dive into. It's pretty hard. It's gnarly. And so I just kept it up as a hobby, and it gave me a lot of important skills about food and cooking and how to create things that people will want to eat. And so I would say that then when I began these health changes, and in one way, it was a huge shock because food and cooking was obviously a huge part of my identity. And I loved making things that make people happy, and that they are just thrilled to eat. And a lot of times that means it's very highly palatable, highly rewarding, high sugar, high fat, high salt, there's a reason all of that makes sense. But cooking school I understood all of those pieces. And so when I began to make shifts and pretty much kind of like said, okay, I got to put all that to the side. I need to focus more on whole foods so that I understand those and appreciate those more. It just brought everything together for me. And I was able to take all those different little pieces. And now I feel pretty confident I can feed people, I can feed myself, but I can also feed other people in ways that are great. It's fantastic food, but it's also something that's going to be more supportive of what I would consider, a healthy eating style. So kind of gave me a huge foundation, pushed me off into the world of too much baking and pastry for a while. But I was able to pull all that stuff back when I decided that I was going to get more into healthy eating pattern.
Yeah. So would it be fair to say that you cook with more of a sustainable approach as opposed to just cooking, only for enjoyment? Enjoyment is obviously important, but you have more of a sustainable element to it now.
Yes. And so I think over the last few years, especially, my approach to food and cooking, I think a great way to describe it in my mind would be been brought more into balance. So I swung from a more highly palatable, highly reward focused in food in general. These are the treats, these are the great restaurant meals you could have, like these things being of high importance to me. Then I kind of swung to let me pull all of those potentially quote junk foods or, highly caloric foods out of my diet and try to like go kind of like, I did paleo for a while. So, like that association of just super simple. And at that point, there were a lot of foods that I wouldn't eat or wouldn't cook and everything. And so now I would definitely say it's a more balanced, holistic, well-informed view of food and cooking and nutrition and eating, in that I don't see foods as quote good or bad. I don't see meals as like cheat meals, because I really think it's important that we divorce this like world of morality from our food. And then understand that food is important in so many ways. It fuels us for sure, but it is also a very important part of who we are as human beings, as social creatures. It's part of our culture, our social interactions, our great memories. All of those things become really important. So I think that I now better understand how those things can work for a lifestyle that promotes enjoyment, tradition, culture, family, but also health.
Yeah, I noticed that when people switch to being more kind of health focused or health centered, that the enjoyment of food kind of gets sucked out of it, which is unfortunate. Yes. All the benefits you just mentioned there, when Christmas is coming up, Thanksgiving's just gone by.
Yeah. It's really, and it's a touchy thing. There were times when I think it was more helpful for me to be a little bit more strict, because I had some pretty profound lifestyle changes that I wanted to make. And so that I think for a time that was helpful, but I don't think it's sustainable. And I don't think everyone needs to even do that. But food is a touchy subject for people, and people have a hard time kind of understanding that it's important and it's enjoyable, but it's not anything and everything from any perspective. It's got to have its place, even though we need it.
That's the thing. We need it, but then it has to have its place. And, that place is, it can vary a lot between different people. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and our whole food environment has gotten so, I do think our food environment overall has gotten out of whack. And, I am definitely in the camp that would say that, in recent generations in particular, our overall food environment has swung too far to the not so healthy food surrounding us, or in our world, easy to get in large portions, all those things. So food is very complicated, but I think we can make a lot of progress there.
Yeah, very complicated.
Yeah.
I think it's like a delayed effect. So the food environment has changed a lot ahead of us. And then we're only realizing, it's not that I put on weight as I kind of get older, for example. It's more like maybe I have more access to different foods. I have different lifestyle demands. It's not an age thing. It's like an environmental thing. It could be like an activity environment, and it could be maybe like a life stress kind of situation, or food environment, all combined. That affect our health.
Yeah. And I agree with you. It's so gradual that I think a lot of times we don't see it, or we just are unwilling to acknowledge it, and there's so many little things, like I even look at something like several generations ago, like if you had a celebration or something like that, even important, right? Someone in your family would probably make the dessert, for example. That would be normal. Takes a little bit more time. It's usually not as massive because it takes more time and all of that. Nowadays, it is so cheap for anyone to go to Costco and buy a cake that is ridiculously large that would feed your family for like a week of dessert, not just a day of dessert, right? And so it's little things like that the lower costs, the ease of access, all of those things just add up. We have a drop in cooking skills even. So, sometimes people would like to eat differently, but they're not really sure how to. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then also the food is like hyper palatable. So I noticed, living here in downtown SF, it's the amount of times I see the homeless people, unfortunately, it's very sad to see them, but that they're eating these hyper palatable, like, they're eating like cakes and stuff like that. And it's like, why would you eat that? And it's like, oh, because if you, are hungry, it's so tasty, it's so easily available, it's everywhere. It's like, of course, that's what they're eating, which is very sad.
Yeah. Easy to get, easy to carry. It actually stores for quite a long time. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes people don't believe me how influential the realm of food science has become as well. Like if once you delve into that and understand how large that industry has come, there are just large amounts of time and money devoted to creating more food that is more highly palatable, that keeps us wanting this more. Doritos wants to sell us more chips, and they put a lot of time and effort into developing something that does just that.
Yeah, the food industry is very good at making us want to eat more food.
Yep.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
Exactly.
You would think that would be a good thing. You'd be like, oh yeah, the food tastes good, I want to eat more of it. It's like, no, it's like, in the short term, that's fine. In the long term, it's pretty detrimental to our health.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So something that I've been thinking of recently is I'm very fortunate to work in a health facility, because if I ever want to work out, or if I ever feel like I'm not working out enough, I just, get to work a bit earlier, stay around a bit longer, and, I work out. Whereas most people's issue is like getting to the gym. For example, if you're a teacher, I'm sure you're kind of like burnt out. So is there anything you've noticed about going from, like, let's just say, working outside the health and fitness industry, and how hard it was to manage your health, versus now, you're kind of in the industry, but not it's the less typical job because you're working as an online coach. But what differences is there? Like, and how hard is it to manage your health when you are, outside the industry, working a job where you're not in and around a gym all the time?
Yeah, really good question. I was just thinking about this the other day because I went to the gym later than normal for me. So, I have kind of like in my head my optimal time to train. And because I work on my own most of the time, that's doable. And I was there several hours later and just kind of annoyed at the idea that, I was like, oh, I don't really like being here at this time, just because I don't prefer it. And I realized, yes, when I had that same thought when I first started and I was teaching, that meant that I was going to the gym after work or before work. And so I was training at either 5:30 or 6 a.m. on some days, or most often I was actually at the gym at 7, 8, 9 p.m. And training. And I'm very, very happy that is not when I train now. But it did just kind of come rushing back. That was part of it. Did make it difficult. And it's one of those things that I definitely appreciate. For a lot of people, there's so many different barriers. Like you said, if you need to drive, right now, if there's tougher access even to a gym because it takes you longer to get there, or there's limits on how many people can be in the gym, or, they're closed for a while still in different areas for different times. Not everybody can have something at home, obviously, although you can train at home, but it can throw you for a loop if you've been at a gym, especially if you're new and then you've got to like pivot and do something else. The last couple of years have been really complicated for a lot of people in that regard. But yeah, and so it goes to, and this is not easy, but it is like the simple principle that so much of this does really depend on the way we set up our environments and the way we build our habits. And so like looking back, for me, that was always having my gym bag packed the night before, like always. It was in my car. I had food with me. I was at that stage, I like usually had running shoes like in my trunk because sometimes I had some pretty wild commutes, and there would be times when, I live in Santa Cruz. You have to drive over what's called Highway 17. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's still a mountain road, and it'll get closed or, horrible traffic very, very easily. And so commuting over that for quite a while, there were times when I would go, well, I could sit here in traffic for 2 or 3 hours, or I could pull over and I could go jog in the park. And that was something totally, totally new for me. But, trying to make a lot of those changes. And it came down to kind of like just pre-thinking the day, like, do I have food? Do I have some different options for where I could train, how I could be active, where I could take a walk, that kind of thing. And I fully understand when a client that I'm working with is just thrown and they're like, I didn't know what to do. Like, I was starving. I didn't have any food. So then I skipped out on the gym, and that's common. And I think once we start experiencing those things, then we can start figuring out, okay, how can I kind of like chip away at those barriers and make it a little bit simpler? Because it is really challenging for a lot of people, for sure.
Yeah, barriers is a big one. Yeah, you realize how many more barriers there is for people outside the industry just to do the basics, which is like, it should be the opposite, really. It should be. It'd be great if gyms were free, even. If memberships to gyms were free, what would that change for healthcare in the US and around the world? But
yeah, or even I have a lot of clients who say, I like, once I'm at work, it's really hard for me to even leave the office, which I understand. But to your point, like, that's one of these environmental things that is pretty awful that we have. And I think it's probably very American, right? But to have people who feel like they're kind of like shut into this office for 8 or 9 hours a day. And the idea of going out for 30 minutes, even, let alone an hour or an hour and 30 minutes, is something they're like, I don't know that I can routinely do that. So then I try to break it down into smaller chunks, but it's very difficult in a lot of situations. Yeah. So then you got to be like, okay, what can we possibly do?
Yeah, that's tough, because I don't think people will consciously choose to do those things, but your environment is like, I heard it described as like the invisible hand that guides you, and it can kind of have you acting or behaving in a way that I guess is kind of like not aligned with your values. So that's, I guess, where coaching comes in.
Yeah, exactly.
So just going back to your transformation, what are some of the things kind of like mentally or psychologically that change from pre to like post that you kind of like picked up along the way? Because you're kind of like a unicorn in the sense that, a lot of people, the average adult in the US is overweight, unfortunately, and or as we now say, has excess adiposity. And basically, it's very hard not to go down that route. So as someone who has been able to kind of go against the grain, we'll say, what did you pick up along the way?
Another good question. So, I think that, well, first I'll kind of like give the caveat that I think a lot of people probably, I know that you would understand. And that is that even when I was struggling with my weight, it was not coming from a place of generally being a lazy or uninformed person, right? So we'll just kind of start off the conversation. And I know that a lot of people in this conversation would understand that, but I think it's helpful to reiterate that. So it's not like I suddenly found this, like, transform my life and suddenly went from being someone who didn't know anything about being overweight and then was like, oh, now I know it all. And now I finally found this motivation that I had like in no part of my life. So that's not the way it works. But there was this, there was this part of my life that I had allowed to just become pretty separate from everything else that I did. And for why people do that or how that happens, I think is pretty complicated and unique. But I had definitely compartmentalized that physical part of my life and convinced myself that it did not matter as much as everything else I was doing. So I do tend to be a very busy person, a very involved person. And as much as like in the back of my mind, I knew this was not correct. I know that I was routinely telling myself that my health, my weight, even though it was concerning to me, that was far less important than my job as a teacher or what I was doing with friends and family or the volunteer work I was doing. So I would tell myself, I just don't have any more time. I'm very busy doing much better things than that, exercise. No, I'm not, and I convinced myself I am not that consumed with my body that I would give up any of these other good things that I was doing. And I do think that's something that a lot of my clients also struggle with, because they have really busy lives. And so then we can think it's selfish for me to quit any of those things or stop caring for the people in our families or whatever. And so I did battle a lot of those feelings of being selfish if I was saying no to other things in order to exercise, or if I was saying no to things because I knew that the food environment was going to be too challenging for me at that time. And, or for me personally, like if I changed the way I was cooking and feeding people, that initially felt very selfish too. Like people wanted certain kinds of food that I had cooked for them for years. And now suddenly I wasn't making it. So that was a big mental shift that I had to work through, that it really was not selfish. It was me caring for myself as a whole person. And interestingly enough, I believed that very, very strongly as a teacher for all of my students. I wanted my students to be whole, complete people. And that idea was huge for me. And so I think that was one of the things that helped me, was realizing that I was not seeing that for myself. So when I was able to understand that more for myself, it made a lot of the things that I needed to do a little bit more possible. And then it made my desire to go into coaching and everything else that I'm doing now, it made it all click a little bit more because, yes, I think that would be the key mental shift that I needed to take care of all of me, and the physical being of myself was not any less important than any other part of me. And I had spent a long time telling myself that it was less important. And, it might be, I didn't want to venture into that world that was like too much focus on aesthetics or body image or anything like that. And then I realized that I was lying to myself. So, yeah.
Yeah. So it was like, for whatever reason, you didn't want to prioritize your physical health, when in actual fact, if you're fortunate enough to realize that you prioritize your physical health, it gives you more energy, or like kind of more ability to do everything else. More, I guess more life to do everything else, right? But it's not easy, it's very, very challenging. And I guess it kind of makes me think that that's why you are almost like the perfect coach, because you've had a lot of different experiences that have led you to the position you're in now. So you can use that in your coaching.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think that the idea of having more life, like that is key. Because a lot of times people would also refer to me as like being a new person. And at first, when people said that to me, in some ways, like I understood the meaning behind that, but it was also a little bit offensive, because I was like, but I'm not a new person. Like I'm me. I'm just me. But you realize that once I understood that the changes that I had in my life, better physical health, that was actually truly enabling to be more of the person that I knew I was. And so then too, once I saw that, then it became a little bit more exciting and not as difficult, because it was very, very difficult at first. At first, it felt like I just have to do so much and it's hard. But once I began to see all of this was coming together to help me to be who I really felt like I was, I do have a lot of energy. I do want to do a lot of things. And this made it all more possible. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what kind of drew me to you to set up this podcast, is your energy, a very nice kind of energy about you.
Thank you.
And then also, going back to the point you made earlier about people who have excess adiposity, they're not lazy,
Yeah.
Like the amount of things you've done, tells me you're a hard worker. So it's like, just because people have excess adiposity doesn't mean that they are any less of a person at all. Which is really sad. I feel like Joe Rogan, does everyone a disservice by, saying, just try harder, or, you just got to do it. And it's like, what about the person who has like kids, or the person who's in debt, or has two jobs, or has mental health issues? So many factors that, like, him and his ivory tower is unaware of. And,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's very frustrating for someone who's in that position to feel like everyone else, or a lot of people, and at that point, I remember at times when I felt like everyone must be judging me for this, because that's what, to your point, that's what a lot of the conversation is. And that is something then that has become really important to me in conversation as a coach, and then just online and the many different things we do, is I want to encourage a different narrative, that this is not who you are, and it is difficult. It is definitely not as simple as just work harder, just read a book, just learn something new. That is not the answer. And it's very frustrating for me, even in our little fitness world, when we have people who you think you've heard more of this before, but you're defaulting to a conversation that is, well, if people just did this. I remember several years ago when Jordan said to me, if you start a sentence with, if I just did, or if you just did, you're probably going to say something that's not going to be productive. And I've realized that's very true. We want to reduce everything to this, just do this statement. And that's really harmful a lot of times when we're discussing things, especially this in this context.
Yeah, it reminds me of during the pandemic when, everything shut down. So I had to do some furniture moving as a job. And, that's an extremely labor intensive job. And, I was there and I was like, oh, you're going to be in great shape doing this job. And, I won't need to go to the gym and I'll be able to maintain my weight or whatever. And it's like, the job is so stressful that it's almost like it's going to break you down, and it's actually much, much harder to be healthy, even though you're doing so much physical activity. So like, I was looking at some of my coworkers and I was like, oh, they're a little bit overweight, but they do so much activity, what's going on there? And it's because the stress and the challenge of the job on a daily basis is so unrelenting that, like, you have to kind of compensate. And of course, when you're on the go, when you're so busy, you're so tired, making the healthiest choices is extremely hard. And even I found it as a health and fitness professional, I found it so difficult. So it's like, you don't really know how hard people have it until you walk in their shoes. And until then, just, leave your judgment at the door and just see what's going on,
Yeah, exactly. No, I think that's excellent. Yeah.
So kind of, I guess, tying into looking after yourself outside of training and just, looking after yourself in general. One of your posts was like a non-training day and non-dieting related ways to take care of yourself. I think that's very important. It's not what we do in the gym that's important for our health. It's nearly, everything outside of it. So could you talk a little bit about that post and why that's important?
Sure. Yeah. That idea has become really important to me. As working in the health and fitness industry, it's very easy for us, or for the people that we work with, to become hyper-focused on a few things in life. Right. And so, and I do think that because in general, we can have an overemphasis on something like diet culture. We can just like zero in on that and be like, this is what defines me. That number needs to change. The size needs to be who I am, anything like that. And so understanding that there is so much outside of the gym and outside of fitness that needs our attention and our care in our lives. And so it is things like our social interactions, our giving to others, our enjoyment of the world around us, our ability to relax. We just talked about this job and the stress that comes with it. And if we aren't also attending to those things, we can get so caught up in specifically our fitness pursuit that these other parts of our well-being do suffer. And so an imbalance there, in my belief, definitely comes with a pretty high cost. And so I it's very important to me. And then it's also very important as a coach for me that I help others to understand that the scale is not it. The food that they eat is not it. The stuff they do at the gym, a competition, like none of that can be it. And you going out and enjoying a walk outside could be as beneficial as you going to the gym that day. And the reality is that life is really complicated. It's really stressful. And we have to keep all those things in mind. And so I do like to speak regularly about a lot of those outside of the gym health pursuits as well. Yeah.
Do you have any kind of common pursuits that you recommend? Or, I know we talked about like having a training journal. Do you kind of journal or recommend clients do that?
Yes. So yes, I do journal. You mentioned that I did have a post where I keep a handwritten journal still for my training. And that's in part because I do note other things in that journal as well, that I think are related to my health. And it's things like, it can be things like how I'm feeling that day, but it can also, I try to be pretty regular about noting good things that happened during my training session as well. And I find that handwriting those in my journal is really, it's a helpful practice. Those good old habits, like actually writing down things that you are thankful for or that you are grateful for, I think sometimes those buzz activities are all around us and we can lose sight of how important they are, because we wake up and we go. We go directly to our phone. We work at home, so we're on our laptop, we're going, and we can totally disconnect from people, from our realization, our mindfulness of where we are in the world and with people and what we have. And so that handwritten training journal is one of the things that I do. And then, yes, I encourage a lot of my clients, we have conversations about noting the things that they have appreciated about what they did, their body did that day, for example, because when you're training, sometimes you can get really hard on yourself and, this didn't go right. I didn't hit the number I wanted to. The training session felt harder. My back hurt, whatever it is. And so we have to work on those positive things, not a false positivity, but, those true things about how we're doing. And then, like I said, the things that we're grateful for, I think is insanely important. And it's not just a toss away kind of activity. And then also maintaining those social connections. And another one of those, like, just vital things for our overall health. Yeah. So definitely, I think volunteering, if you can find ways to do that, is a really profound way to help in that regard. And then maintaining those connections with friends and family that are healthy for you. And sometimes in the busyness of our tech world, unfortunately, those kind of things can even be lost. So I remind myself and others of that often because, even working from home, you can kind of like get in this cave where you're like, here I am, just all by myself, or just seeing a limited number of people. So unfortunately, we have to be kind of pushed out of that frequently right now, especially.
Yeah, we can lose sight of the little things that happen in our day outside of our routine, or just things that are important to us that we kind of, gloss over, it feels like. Something that I wanted to go over that we skipped over was weight bias. And I've heard of how people who have a larger body experience a lot of weight bias. Like, I'm very lucky that I've never experienced it, but I feel as though it's kind of pervasive, but people are not fully aware of it. So do you have any kind of thoughts on that or any experience of that?
Yeah. Do you have a fair amount of experience with weight bias? It was one of the things that was very difficult. I think if you have not lived in a body that is larger, and I know a lot of my friends, like when I told them some of these things, they had no idea. But you weight bias with medical care, unfortunately, is certainly a thing. And I definitely experienced it. And sometimes I would joke about it, but you feel like anything you go in for, the answer is, well, it'd probably be good if you lose weight. And you're kind of like, I know that, but I have a sinus infection. And that's what I would like to talk about right now. Right. And so definitely went through a lot of that. Generally felt pretty, like a lot of what I might want to speak to someone in medical care for was often dismissed, in that my weight would have been the only thing that we would need to talk about. And then, there is real and then just kind of like also self-perceived bias. And, I I still do, but, for quite a while, I've traveled quite a bit for different jobs, and flying became so stressful because it's a small space. The aisles are small, the seats are small. You feel like you are in people's way, making their trip very uncomfortable. The look you get when you sit down next to someone and they're worried about you taking up more of the airplane space than they think you should is awful. It does not feel good. Going to a restaurant and everybody's sitting in a booth, and it's hard work at certain body sizes to get around to the middle of a booth. And, you got to kind of position yourself so you can sit on the edge, and or it's just really awkward. And when I first started running, trying to jog, I would try to do these couch to 2K programs. And this is one of those things where I think most of the time it was perceived, like this was my self-perception, that I must look like everyone must be looking at me thinking she should not be doing this. Why is she doing this? Now I recognize that most people do not think that. Unfortunately, there are people who think that. But I do realize now that most people do not think that. And I certainly don't think that when I see other people doing that. And so, but in that stage, that's all I could think of, was that I stood out like a sore thumb. And so I am more noticeable in everything that I did. And then you do also feel like when you are in living in that body, in general, a lot of people judge you for anything you do or eat that they think you should not be doing or eating. And so it's also very hard when, you're in situations and you're like, yeah, like everybody wants to go out to pizza. Here we are. And yet it's very common for the judgment to be that someone who has excess adiposity should not be eating what everyone else is eating, for example. And so, yes, there's quite a bit of it, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's so sad, because you think how important, like you said, connection is, and community, and we should be lifting each other up, or supporting each other at the very least. So would it be fair to say that when people have a weight bias, or they kind of treat someone who's larger differently, they are kind of they're definitely not supporting them, but it's kind of, that doesn't even do it justice. They're doing the complete opposite. They're
Yes.
treating them like less than, just simply because they weigh more. That's literally
Yes.
all it is. And yeah.
Yep. No. And I think that is exactly it. It's actually, I think, unfortunately, because the idea of just working harder is so pervasive, I do think, unfortunately, so many people think that they're kind of like, their attitude is okay, because they're like, well, yeah, I mean, like, if these people just knew, if they just did this, if they just cared a little bit more. And I think, unfortunately, I mean, I do think some people are genuinely unkind, and uncharitable. But the more Pollyanna side of me, the more optimistic side of me, and people does believe that, unfortunately, there's a lot of people who don't see that their attitude is actually hurting. It's harming people. It's creating more barriers, because, to your point, if someone then feels isolated, judged, uncomfortable, that creates more and more barriers to them making social connections, being with people, walking around outside. I mean, people have probably all seen different videos of people yelling things out of a car at someone who's jogging or walking. And I had those experiences too. I know what that is like, and it is awful, and so all of those things add up, as you said, to make it more difficult. It is the opposite of helpful, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of feels as though you're getting, we're we're sort of justifying bullying each other just because we feel like it's the right thing to do without actually, thinking, is it the right thing to do?
Right.
So, I think I could think of a few things, but is there anything you could think of that people can do to like check their weight bias if they have it, or like, sort of, I guess, be more aware?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I do think that the more we understand and can internalize the idea that being with obesity is better viewed as a disease state than anything else, right? So if we can internalize that more individually and then as a society, I think we can make some nice progress here. It's still going to be complicated, but we understand that someone who has high blood pressure or someone who has diabetes or high cholesterol, right? We understand that there are interventions that can be used there, that there are lifestyle changes that can be made, but we also understand that there's a lot out of the control of that individual related to that disease. And so I think the more individuals and our society can understand that that does apply to someone with obesity as well, I think that can go a long way. I just had another conversation with someone who cares a lot about this idea and yet is really struggling with accepting the fact that we could think of someone with obesity as in a similar position as someone with any other diagnosable disease. And so I think we're unfortunately a long way from wrapping our head around that. And I think that's really important. I think that will make a lot of differences. And then I think just individually, like if someone wants to think about this as a person, just on a very individual scale, that weight bias can be checked by recognizing when we start thinking or speaking as if there's a simple solution to this for either people or another individual. And so if you care or have someone in your life and who has excess adiposity and you think, how can I think about this? I think that's a really important starting point. This is not a moral failing of theirs. This is not that they are simply not caring enough about their life. And change is hard because of so many factors. And it can be genetics, it can be environmental, it can be cultural, it can be just their job, it can be their access, it can be their skills. And so acting as if it's easy to fix this is probably one of the biggest things that we need to change.
Yeah, for me, it's like change is really hard. Like long-term change, there's even a site and it's about people who have lost weight and they've maintained it. I think it's the National Weight Loss Registry. I think that's what it's called. Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
And basically they made a whole site about it. I think the guy's name is Hill maybe, but basically there's a whole site about these group of people who were participants in his study and they've been able to keep weight off. I think it's just, the threshold is just like 5 or 10% weight loss for, it's over like 5 years, Yeah. And people, I think if you did a kind of a poll of the general population, you'd be like, oh yeah, that'll be relatively easy. But it's like, no, change is really hard. So I think that's important to keep in mind, that just think of your own habits, things you've tried to change yourself, and think of how difficult it is to maintain it for the long term. Anyone can change something for a day or a week or 30 days, but to do it for 30 years is like, no one's figured that out yet, really.
Right. Yeah. And it's very complicated. And I can also say that personally, I've even gone through more change and understanding, even in the last 6 months, I would say, of understanding myself, as it is difficult at times to maintain my weight loss. And sometimes this is surprising to people when they see me now. And, because oftentimes people would never imagine that sometimes I forget that people did not know this about me, or they think that it must be easy. And in some ways it is very routine. There's so many things in my life that are now different, all these different small things. And so in some ways it is much different, much easier, but in other ways, it is still a challenge. And so that's where I do think that understanding those with obesity a little bit differently helps us to understand that. And it was difficult for me to even kind of wrap my head around the fact that in a way, this isn't something, if obesity is a disease, this isn't something that then I fix completely in my own life. And that was hard for me to wrap my head around when I first started wrestling with this, because I wanted to believe that something was going to happen in which I was going to have this life that I imagined everybody else in the world must have, right? So I had this thinking that there must be something I could do that was going to suddenly switch things so that I kind of didn't have to think about this anymore. Because in my head, that's how other people in this world live, that they just go about their life and food, weight, all of that is easy. And I think that's ingrained in us because of our cultural bias and our weight bias and all of that. But, so I had to wrestle and like accept that. I had to come to some acceptance there that this is me, and it's okay. And it was hard for me at first to say this is me and it's okay, but it's helping my life to recognize that that is the case. And so there's that level of acceptance was pretty big for me. And that's one of the things that I think is very hard for a lot of people, because I can assure you that all of us who have been in this stage, we do think that the rest of you who don't have it live this magical life that we can't imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you said earlier about prioritizing your physical health, you have to accept that that was a change that, would benefit your life. And it reminds me that, any change, there's no kind of destination really. Like the only destination is, really when you die, or, there'd be some other destinations, of course, but like for the most part, that's really the only time you stop, especially with your health, that you stop looking after your health. So you never reach your weight gain, your weight loss goal, and then that's it, and you stop. So that's like a really, important point to point out. And it's crazy. I think like when I was younger, I used to get my mental health wasn't it's never been like amazing, but when I was younger, I'd always think, if I was just bigger like this person, or if I was just like that. But in actual fact, it's like you kind of almost have to, just take it day by day. I think what's the sort of the Alcoholics Anonymous kind of quote is like, you just take it one day at a time, like sobriety, basically.
Yes.
So it's kind of like it's like a big change like that when you're trying to change your health, and it mightn't necessarily be the the huge transformation you've gone through. It might be something much more like could be the person you're talking about who's in the cubicle in work, who finds it hard to get away from their desk, and they're like, my sobriety is going for the 30-minute walk twice a day or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then recognizing that's huge. It's important. And it's still not going to be easy sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's never going to be easy, but you can create, I guess, the kind of the state of health that you will be happier with, or that you want, if you accept, like you have, prioritize your health, and then just start to make small changes over time. Maybe even hire a coach, maybe even get more support that way, or
exactly.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things. And, and that said, like there are some things, like sometimes I try to describe it as there are some things that do become routine as brushing my teeth, right? Most adults, we remember to brush our teeth every day, and there are some things about my health changes for sure that I would like put in that category. And that's another part of going back to the question you had earlier about mindfulness and journaling and some of those things. That's another value there, that sometimes I have to recognize that those things have become kind of a brushing my teeth habit, what I eat for breakfast, for example, or how I order my coffee. Like, again, to your point, they can seem like small things, but all of those small things add up. The fact that I don't really think about going to the gym anymore, those are good things. But then again, there are other things where I'm like, oh, wow, yeah, this is a bit of a mental struggle, And so things thankfully do fall into different categories over time too.
Yeah, you can say that again. It's a lot of a mental struggle. And I feel like the more I learn about health and exercise, nutrition, the more I realize that it is more psychology than anything, you know? So it's like, if you want a different outcome, you know, you need to, let's just say a health outcome, you need to eat differently and you need to exercise differently. But before all that, you need like nearly like a new belief system. You need to believe something differently, you know, to get that outcome. So
Yeah.
yeah, we kind of touched on, you know, the work environment, the home environment. A post you had was the home and workplace environment, and how food ties in with that. Could you just talk a little bit about that? Because food is a big part of our health.
Yeah. Yeah. So that particular post was definitely addressing one of these common things, you know, like you and I have talked about how we probably have the luxury of setting up our environments like pretty particularly, but I recognize that a lot of people don't. And, you know, some examples that come to mind are, you know, I do think that stay-at-home parents of young children often, you know, you are managing a lot of different things. I think, you know, I'm able to, I don't have kids in my home, so I do not have kids snack food even. I don't pack lunches for kids, you know, all of those things. Those are not there. I don't need to make food that they will eat, you know, like, and it's a really touchy subject, you know, because sometimes people are like, if you just feed kids this, they'll eat it, and don't, you know, and it's, I do not believe anything is that simple. Some people are in situations where it runs a little bit smoother, and there truly are other times when you're like, I need this kid to eat food. So if it's mac and cheese 4 days in a row, then that's mac and cheese. And, you know, and then, you know, other professions, like, you know, I've worked with a number of nurses, and especially ICU nurses, for example. You know, you're talking about this high stress job, hours, running around or caring for other people, not really sitting down. You add in break rooms that are in hospitals, just absolutely full of junk food so often, and it's easy to grab, it's quick. And those are the type of home and work environments that I do want to help I want to help people understand and kind of like assess, like where, how am I living? What kind of environment am I in? Let me like reasonably assess this, and then start to see what I can change, rather than kind of like throwing up your hands in the middle and saying, everything is too hard, I don't know what to do. I understand that feeling, but instead I think we can step back and say, okay, this is difficult. We acknowledge that. Oftentimes that's really important to know that and affirm that. And so a major change all at once might be tricky. So what kind of small changes can we make? And things like changing your home food environment, for example, would be things like buying different sized packages, you know, so that Costco is super appealing, but if you buy a large package of everything and then you open it, and then it's sitting open, the draw is to just keep eating it, right? Your hand just keeps going in that bag. If you buy smaller sizes, it's easier to control those portions. It's easier to give your kids a snack when they go to school, that kind of thing, and not be eating what else is in the bag. It's very, very productive to keep highly palatable, highly reward foods harder to even reach, harder out of sight, in the back of a refrigerator, in the back of a cupboard, in a box somewhere. It might sound trite, but once those kind of things are out of our line of sight, we don't think about them as often. And if we're not seeing them and thinking about them, then that cuts down on the number of times we have to kind of like mentally go through this. Do I eat it or not? Do I take it? Am I hungry? Am I not? Do I want it? Like, if you think about how many times you have to go through that over a day, it starts to make sense why after a while you just get exhausted and you're just like, I've run through this scenario for hours. I'm done. I'm just going to eat it now. And so oftentimes our food environment improves when we understand that that's what we're putting ourselves in. So if we can remove some of that, the food stress, the food thinking, the food like conversation in our brain goes way down, and that can help a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Like if you are a stay-at-home parent and you have 2 kids and you have to have, you know, kids' food around the house and you're burnt out, it's like, there's only so much motivation you're going to have to like not eat those foods, especially if you're tight for time or you're lacking sleep. And if you're a nurse right now, or, you know, you're working in hospitals right now during COVID, like the burnout there must be insane. So it's like,
Exactly.
it might be like, your goal might be just to like, limit the damage during this period, or yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's it, right? It's understanding what kind of situation are you actually in and what's a reasonable next step here. Yeah.
yeah. What's a reasonable next step? Yeah, that's really a really good thought. And then something I have thought of myself is like, I get stressed like, like anybody, even though I'm like a health and fitness professional. And I was thinking, so in an ideal world, these kind of hyper palatable foods, I would have them in the home and I would be able to moderate them. I would be like, I would have enough, but not too much. Kind of like, you would drink, you know, the one that's one too many. But I'm
Yep.
like, that is so much work. Like that is, it feels like possible at times,
Yes.
Um, so I was like, oh yeah, no, the easier thing to do is abstinence. So have them out of the home altogether. But I'm like, something doesn't sit right with me with that, as well at the same time. So it's kind of like, it feels as though for, just for me personally, there's no winning, but it's like, um, is there value in just abstaining and not having like these hyperpalatable foods in the home 100% of the time? But then sometimes, when you eat out, for example, your plan is that you have these foods, or yeah, I guess what do you think of like trying to improve the skill of moderation, or going the abstinence route with, the hyperpalatable foods, which are so plentiful right now?
Yeah. So I think you framed that interestingly in that I do think there's a high value in having less of those foods in our homes, but then understanding that we tend to have additional checks and balances when we are eating in a different location with other people. Not all the time, right? So like if you go to a buffet, all these rules go out all these ideas go out the window. It's like, how many things can I fit on my plate? Because I have to get my money's worth or whatever. So that's like its own situation. But if you're thinking about going to a restaurant or going to eat at a friend's house or something like that, that's a great situation for you to go ahead and enjoy some of those things that you might not keep in your home. It's no longer in your home, right? It's outside. The time frame in which you can consume those is usually limited. You also have social interaction happening while you're doing this. So you have conversations, you have movement, or you have like different things that are keeping your mind from just on something else other than just the food. That can also be helpful. And then you are done, so you're in this situation for several hours. Maybe you've eaten more than you would like if you had planned it out perfectly ahead of time. But in the long run, like that's a really moderate way to enjoy those foods, be with other people, enjoy all those different interactions, and then know that it's done. It's over. You're going to go home. You're not taking those foods with you. And so you're moving on. And that's generally how I like to approach those situations. And, the only, I do have some clients who during certain times, particularly it's really my more competitive athletes. And then I go through times like this as well, leading up to a meet where it's kind of like almost full abstinence, which is tricky. And I will say, even from my own personal experience, when you go for like fully restricting certain food groups or things like that in order, like for me to make weight by a certain date, I have to understand that can come with a cost. And so I have to be prepared for that. So post meet, I generally need to have a plan in place for how I'm then not going to feel like, okay, well, I didn't eat these 10. All I've been thinking about for the last 2 weeks is the food that I haven't eaten. And so now all I want to do is eat those things and kind of catch up. And so that's another thing you have to be aware of. But that's a pretty unique situation in which I would have someone actually like hard abstaining from food. Yeah.
You said it, yeah. Having a plan is my takeaway. So it's like,
Yeah.
having the worst form plan is better than none at all. And you can always have different iterations or revisions of a plan, but at least once you have a plan for a challenge or kind of obstacle planning, then, you can do a lot more about it. Whereas if you're just flying by the seat of your pants or whatever it is, then it's going to be much more challenging. But
yeah. And I encourage people to, like, if they go to a restaurant or they go to a party or something like that, like have that plan even there. Like look at the menu if you need to ahead of time, or when you get to someplace, like kind of scope out what are your options, and then kind of like give yourself that space to say, okay, what is it that I really want? Both for my goals, but also for my, what do I really want? Instead of just like going in, as you said, blind to that and being like, well, it's here, I'm going to eat it. And then later we often go, why did I do that? Some of it I didn't like, some of it I didn't care about, but I just ate it. So sometimes it's just even in situations like that going, let me pause, let me think. I really would like this flourless chocolate cake for dessert. So if that matters more to me today than the appetizers that the other people are going to order at this table, like assessing that ahead of time then really helps me to feel like I'm more successful.
Yeah. And a part of it too is like accepting that eating outside the home is like a new environment. It's like novel, and it's accepting that it's going to be challenging, and applying some of that, like a little bit of planning, and you can get better at it over time. That's
for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, speaking of challenges then, so your recent meet coming up to the present day, it was a bit more challenging than you would have liked. Will you speak a little bit about that? How you've got to the point where you're competing at the level you're at, and the type of training you do?
Yes. So I competed at the Virginia Pro Masters Invitational a couple weeks ago, and it was the first pro invitational weekend that the USAPL has done. And so it was a big reason why I decided to do it. I qualified for it. It worked out for me. And I thought, okay, I want to be a part of this. And so that pro meets do come with a certain level of qualification. So you have to have established a previous lifting total or score in order to compete in one of these meets. And and then they are smaller, and their production value, production is a little bit higher or a lot higher. So they're a lot of fun. They're unique. And I had some solid training going into this meet. I would not overstate it and say it was amazing training. So I didn't go into this meet thinking I am going to crush every PR. Like, this is just going to be incredible. That was not my meet expectation. It was, but my expectation was this is going to be a great meet. I'm going to be ready for this. I've got some solid lifts I'm going to put on the board, feeling good. And I went to the meet and had the most unexpected, unsuccessful meet that I've had so far, right? So there are other meets where I've gone into it maybe knowing one lift wasn't doing as well for a certain reason, and I knew that, right? This one, I made my squat opener and I made my bench opener, and I missed my second and third attempts on both. And on both, I was like, I don't know what's wrong. And my openers flew. Every one of my openers was like, I could do this any day of the week. Like, I could be sick, and you want your opener like that, but it went so well in my mind that I was sure my second attempts were there as well. And they weren't. And the squat, I can kind of understand, like, I was going for a pretty heavy second attempt, but it's something that I have done before. And so I was like, I felt ready. I missed it. You try to grind out a max attempt squat in a meet. It's pretty hard to come back and get it for your third. I mean, people can. And that was what I was like focused on doing, but I did not make it. And then the bench, I don't know what happened there. And so squat was frustrating. Then when I got to that point in my bench, I walked off the platform from the bench, and I thought, my dad was there handling me, and I looked at my dad and I said, I would like to quit right now. Like, if I could, I would walk out and go home. This is awful. And he just looked at me and he said, I know, but you're not. And I said, that is true. I'm not. So I just went and I sat down, put in my music, and I thought, what am I going to do now? Right. And so at that point, I pulled out my earbuds and I looked at my dad and I said, so I go into a meet and I have a plan A and a plan B. And so I said, going into deadlifts, I'm just going to lift plan B. And I said, don't make any changes to it, because as my handler, then he would turn in my attempts after each lift. And so I said, I'm going to go and I'm going to get my opener, because I'm confident that I'm going to get this deadlift opener as well. And then I'm not even going to talk to you. Don't talk to me afterwards. I'm going to walk off. I want you to just turn in that B number. Do not let me change my mind, no matter what. And he was like, got it. That's what we're going to do. Good. And then the other thing he told me, he was like, and don't forget, this is like golf. My dad talked me into golfing when COVID first hit, because it was like the only thing that you could do around here. So he's like, it's just like golf. You can never look back to the hole that you just did. Like, you got to move on. Same thing. And I was like, yep, you're right. Because surprise, surprise, that's one of the things that frustrates me in golf. It's, I'll have a bad hole and then I'll be like, So he's like, so we're moving on. And so I went out there, I pulled my opener, felt good, but it also felt super good to do it. And then I pulled my second attempt, felt even better, right? And I had that brief moment, always the competitor, where I was like, I think I have more in me than my plan B. And I was like, I think I could pull more, but I stuck with my plan and I just walked off and I let my dad turn in the number. And afterwards, we talked about it. And I said, I had that brief moment of being like, I want a higher number. I said, but I was really glad that we had decided ahead of time that I was not going to change my mind, because at that point I needed to pull all 3 deadlifts. And I ended the meet like, I was elated. I've never been that happy to pull 167.5 as I pulled at that point. You would have thought that I had just PR'd. I was thrilled. The audience was thrilled because they knew it had been a tough meet for me. So it just, at that moment, it felt fantastic. And it was a really good way to end the meet. I still ended the meet, earned a bunch of pro points. So I clocked all those for the pro circuit. And then lifted with people that I've been lifting with for a long time. Totally respect. If I was going to have a tough meet, I don't think there could have been a group of people than these masters lifters who have competed at very high levels previously. And so they knew what I was going through. Almost every one of them, if not every one of them, have had meets like this or worse. Like someone said to me, you at least stayed in the meet. You didn't miss. And so I got a score, and, my openers still gave me a solid total, not the total that I know I have, but there we go. And so it was a huge learning experience, but, I'm also really, really happy because this is the first meet that has had a problem in it, after which I did not kind of like have this spiral of self-doubt and angst afterwards. And so that's some huge mental competitive progress there. Don't get me wrong, it was frustrating. I don't want to, if I could, I would not do this again. I would not wish that experience on other people as well. It is not fun at all. And yet it's pretty affirming that now I see that I do have a little bit better understanding of where competition fits in my entire life and its place. And I am maybe getting a little bit of that truth that there's some things that I can't explain and can't control. And so I just have to let it go. And so that was a big takeaway from this meet. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like there's so many takeaways there. Like, you can't really put a price on your support that you have, like your dad, and, just stick to the plan, when in doubt, stick to the plan.
Yep.
Finish what you start, and just, it's not about how you start, it's about how you finish.
Yes.
You can see that I'm a sucker for quotes, so I'm just firing them all out here. But yeah, you seem like, I wouldn't be able to tell if you had told me, okay, guess if you didn't hit your 9 out of 9, or if you hit 5 out of 9, I wouldn't be able to tell, because you seem, so happy about everything you learned. You really made the best of a tough situation, which is like, a testament, I guess, to your approach and the work you put in. So no doubt you'll bounce back.
Thank you. Yep. Looking forward to the next one. It'll be a better score.
For sure. Yeah. And if not the next one, the one after. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. There's lots of time for these.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's a long-term game, this lifting track. So is there anything that you want to let people know about or wrap up on, or anything that we didn't mention that you want to go over?
So I don't think so. Obviously, we could talk for a really long time about a lot of different things. I really appreciated a lot of the different topics that we ended up discussing today. I think they are very, very important. And I think just like really my parting thoughts would be, thinking back over what we have just talked about, are just the idea is, as a coach and as someone who works in this industry, it truly is the most important thing to me that individuals understand that that change is possible. It is hard. So I never like to tell people that it's going to be easy or that we have a quick fix for things. But that there is hope if you would like something to be different. And there are individuals who are passionate. It's not just me, but there are so many individuals who are passionate about being here for others who want to pursue health and fitness. And sometimes I get really discouraged at this industry because sometimes the public face seems so quick fix. Buy this, do this, 30 days, and that's discouraging. Or it's just stuff that is crap that you're just like, no, stop talking about that. But I also know that there are so many people who are truly dedicated to the things that matter in the health and fitness industry. And that's exciting to me. And so then knowing those kind of people, having conversations like this, knowing that people are going to listen to this, who are going to care about these ideas, or maybe take something from this, the clients that both you and I work with, like those are the things that all come together and make this just a fantastic career to be involved in. And I absolutely love it. Yeah.
Yeah. You can't let the setbacks or the downsides of the industry, let you kind of define what you do and, stop you from doing good things that you do. Because there is a lot of good that we can do. We can change people's lives. It'll probably take longer than we think, but we can do it.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
All right, Leah, thank you very much for your time. It's been great talking to you.
Good. Thank you.